Good morning. Today is October the 28th of the year 2024. It is getting a little chilly, so put your sweater on, folks. I recently bought a thicker blanket called duvet, something like that. I didn't know that there were thicker and thinner blankets. I just had the one. I don't know why I shared that. That's not really applicable to this podcast. But today, we are moving right along in this series on the marks of a true church. And today we'll be talking about church discipline. You are listening to the Dear Church Podcast. Welcome to the Dear Church Podcast, where we exist to fill your ears and your minds with the study of God to see the world as disciples of Christ. My name is Sam Yang, and we have with us Pastor Eugene and the regular squad, Chunsuk and Brian here this morning, joining you live on your drive to work, or maybe it's not live. Yeah, Chunsuk just told me it's not live.
It's never live.
Yeah, but I am alive.
It's a podcast.
Yeah. We should do live stuff, though. It'd be an early morning for us. Anywho, this morning we are continuing our series on marks of a true church. And the question is, what makes a church a good church? In the first week, 2 weeks ago, we talked about biblical preaching. Last week, we talked about the sacraments. And today we are talking about church discipline. And I know we've already talked about church discipline before on this podcast, but I thought it might be interesting for us to, again, review what church discipline is, how we can apply it biblically, and maybe even, how do we handle situations where people have been hurt by church discipline in other churches, or maybe even here? How do we handle and kind of talk through that and pray through that? Maybe we'll talk about that at the end as well. So to start, I wanted to define church discipline, and I just have two sources for us this morning. And the first one is Jonathan Leeman. He describes it as correcting sin and is a process that begins with private warnings and ends when necessary with removing someone from church membership and participation in the Lord's table for unrepentant sin. So it's a correction of unrepentant sin, ending in, when necessary, excommunication. This is from Ligonier. I thought this was a good little excerpt for us to consider as we begin this podcast. While it is not controversial to think that a true church would teach God's word and obey Christ's command to observe the sacraments, many Christians would doubt that church discipline is necessary to have a true church. In reality, however, the idea of church discipline is an essential parallel to the first two marks. After all, doesn't the Bible tell us that it is not enough for the word to be properly taught and preached, but that it must be obeyed and acted on? How can the church properly administer the sacraments without determining to whom they apply? Church discipline is the mechanism that the Lord has decreed for the designating and building up of his church, the family of God. I thought that was helpful. And I think that's oftentimes the case because a lot of us grew up with baptism, the Lord's Supper. A lot of us grew up with biblical preaching, or what we thought was biblical preaching many times. And not a lot of us have seen examples of church discipline. At least not done correctly. And so I think this is a good topic for us to review and talk about, as it is a mark of the true church. And so, Pastor Eugene, as we begin...
How about your lip?
So, okay, that's a great question. What happened was, and this is kind of embarrassing, so we had our Reformation Fall Festival this past Sunday. And as we were setting up in the sanctuary as a mock run, I went to go pick up a chair at the same time that Christine kicked the chair. As I was picking it up, she kicked it and then it hit my lip.
Why did she kick it?
She didn't kick it. She was moving it with her foot. But she didn't know I was going to pick it up. So I was bending over to pick it up. As she moved it, and it boom, hit my lip. And I did the same thing because I didn't want her to feel bad. But now everyone knows. And I can't even smile properly. It hurts. I got punched.
It's rough. Did you put Vaseline on it?
I didn't know that was like an option. I didn't really put anything on it. So how would we, or how would you rather define church discipline? Yeah.
Everything that we do here on this earth is when you're justified, you are now moving in a life of sanctification. Yes? Sanctification is not a term that you should just, keep to the side and think, oh, that's just a Christianese term. It's everything that you do now has to do with sanctification because you have been justified. Looking forward to our glorification. So sanctification then has to do with holiness, it has to do with purity. Keeping the church's purity has been maybe one of the key things that you will read in all of Paul's letters, all of the apostles' letters, like Peter's letters, like how judgment starts in the house of God. So the church's purity is key. One of the mechanisms that we have been given directly, actually, by the Lord Jesus Christ is discipline. From Matthew 18 that we'll go over, I'm sure, later. And keeping the church's purity is what is essential then. The fact that our churches are dying, and when we went over like Revelation, in the first 3 chapters, you would see things like how Jesus addresses the churches. When Jesus addresses the churches, what does he address? He addresses their purity. And so discipline is the mechanism that we have been given to keep and hold on and to preserve the purity of the church. It's essential in the sense where if you don't keep it, you're saying that the purity of the church is not a priority for us. When it is, actually, if you don't have it, then you're not a church. That's just what it is. When we're talking about the 3 marks of the church, we're really talking about the purity of the church. And so when you want to understand discipline, you have to understand it in that light.
So someone might think, okay, I understand that we have to preserve the purity of the church and we are instructed to, but why does it have to go to this drastic measure of publicly shaming a person for their sins?
Well, I mean, that's false, right? Because we don't go there all the time and we don't go there immediately. Those are all, towards the end. Those are all final measures. And it's because of, hopefully, what we'll discuss further in depth, but it is because church discipline isn't retributive. It's not punitive. It's corrective. It is with the heart of bringing the person back into a life of obedience.
Restorative.
Thank
you.
What's another word?
Not punitive. So, I mean, I think when people think about church discipline, though, the first thing that they think about is just excommunication, just outright. And for them, that might seem like, isn't that not showing grace? Isn't that not really showing mercy to somebody that's messed up? Everyone's messed up, right? And so why should a church ever do that publicly? It just seems like a step that you're taking to shame somebody when you could be doing that in private. Why do we have to do that?
A lot of it is, private. In fact, most of our church discipline has been private. But if you just say church discipline has to be private, then you have missed the point, because another word is proleptic. Church discipline is proleptic, right? And so that's something that we have to understand.
Proleptic. Yeah. It's anticipating or foreshadowing, yeah.
Proleptic of what is to come.
Foreshadowing of what is to come, yeah.
Right. And so what is to come, the ultimate judgment. So you have a small judgment that you may experience here on earth so that you recognize there is a greater judgment if you continue on the path that you are in. For instance, let's say we go all the way to the end of excommunication.
Yeah.
And you, ex meaning out of communication, meaning out of communion or the fellowship. So now you're out of the fellowship, you have been cut off. And that is proleptic in the sense where you will see what is to come if you continue on this path. You will be cut off from God's people, from His graces, from the mercies that the church receives, from the benefits, the blessings, the special grace, meaning you don't get the sacraments, right? And so those are things that you would see. And so, everything has to do with that heart and attitude. And if it means to go all the way to, where, people think, the first thing that the people think of when we think of discipline is excommunication.
Yeah.
It's false. That's not true. But it is a thing that people think of, probably because it's the most severe punishment that you could get. This is just the first level.
Yeah.
We need to understand then the purpose of discipline. The purpose of discipline, like we said, isn't punitive, it's corrective. It's to aim to bring straying members back to the church. It serves as also a warning to the rest of the community that sins cannot be public. It cannot continue to go on without a heart of repentance, because a little yeast will leaven the whole lump.
Yeah.
And so we want to make sure that you want to separate those that are potentially corrupting or harming to others.
Mm-hmm. And I want to read a couple of passages that I think might be helpful as we have this discussion. And I think one of the big questions with church discipline is, how do you do it? And this is from Matthew chapter 18, verses 15 to 17. And this is Jesus teaching his disciples. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. But if he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. And so here we have levels. One is a private, personal level. The next is another brother or two. And then after that, it is the entire church. And if this individual refuses to even listen to the church, that person is cut off as a Gentile and a tax collector. Mm-hmm. And so, like you said, excommunication isn't the first step. There's always a process that is involved. And I think the only time that we see it publicly is excommunication. I think that's why people may have that kind of notion, but that is not the case. 90% of it is done privately to bring the person back. And even excommunication, like you said, is to bring the person back.
So we went over the purpose of discipline. Now here are the levels of discipline, how it's administered. You have private admonition. So people go up to each other privately all the time. Whether you recognize it formally as discipline or not, it is discipline. So I do kind of half-jokingly tell people, maybe it's not a joke at all, but I go tell people the fact that I'm telling you this has gone beyond that first level of private admonition between 2 brothers.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a joke.
Yeah, so now that I've come up to you to address this, it is now the next level, which is we have gone from private one-on-one admonition to now you've gone up to the session. So when I come to anybody, it could be a deacon or elder, and I say one thing, it's like, brother, I've heard this and this, so multiple witnesses, you can't do this. That is the next level of discipline. Mm. And I would say most of the church will never hear about that too, except for the brother that had been wronged in the first place or something like that, right? So let me just go to one example that this may make sense. Let's say someone's at a parking lot and you don't put away your shopping cart.
What parking lot is this? It depends.
Costco,
it really depends.
Costco. Yeah.
Costco is a good one because there's a lot of people, a lot of carts everywhere.
They just leave shopping carts everywhere. Let's say you are a professing Christian and you don't put away your shopping cart.
Yeah.
Are you still a Christian? Just kidding.
I think so.
Obviously, this is a very minor thing that I'm just trying to show an example for. If you don't put away your shopping cart, it could have been, I'm so busy, you'll understand, my kids need me, I'm late for something, and you just put it on the side and go. People do that all the time. But let's say you regularly don't put away your shopping cart, even though you do have time, or that's not a thought in your head.
Yeah.
But then that shopping cart, then you make it roll, and you don't put it in the right spot, first of all, if you don't put away your shopping carts, I personally, now this is not what the church thinks, I personally think you have character issues.
Wait, but what if you put it on the little, you know how when you just pop it up on the ledge there so that it doesn't roll because you're caring for your neighbor and you make sure that it's far enough from the next car so that it doesn't bump?
In Costco, if you're talking about the Teterboro Costco, there are places alongside the curb that you could put it that people do so it's easier for the worker to get to.
Yeah.
And there are shopping cart, where you could put it back. There's some more formal places.
Houses, yeah.
They're just, people do that. Look, I'm not here to be a stickler about shopping carts. I'm here to say, let's say you don't put away the shopping cart. It's a regular thing, something that you always do. But this time, it actually rolls and hits someone else's car.
Oh, that's tough.
And that person has a tiny dent in the car. And that person happens to be a church member. What have you done? You've wronged your brother. So the brother goes to you, he's like, bro, you rolled it and it hit my car. And you're like, yeah, I don't care.
Unrepentance.
My kid needed to be picked up from soccer practice. I don't know, whatever it is, right? I needed to pick up my kid from school. So whatever, dude. Like if it hit your car, you just have to understand I was busy.
Better be messy or something.
Like you have to understand that this is a small thing that probably people can't relate to because you don't do that. Because I'm sure everyone that listens to this podcast puts their shopping carts away anyway.
I don't think so.
So this is something that you won't relate to. But I'm saying this points to other issues in the church. Whether you recognize it or not, it can actually bump into another person and you could wrong the other person.
Yeah.
The other person has now been wronged. The other person will do their best to cover, forgive, obviously. But it could be a wrong where there's damage done that needs to be, restored, let's say. And so not only are you doing this, you keep on pushing these shopping carts into other people's carts. You're continually doing this. You should stop, brother. And the other person's like, you don't understand my life. You don't know me. My kid has soccer practice every day. I don't know, whatever it is. I need to pick up my kid from school. No one else is going to do it. And I need to go. You don't understand. And so the guy's like, all right, this person's not taking my admonition. I'm going to bring it up to an elder because this person seems like he's doing something that can be dangerous in the future. Even though it's small dent here, I think it's a little dangerous. Brings it up to the elder. Elder goes, really? And not only does the elder go, really, he's already heard about this from 2 or 3 other members that have also approached this brother to not do this. So now the elder goes to this brother and says, I've heard this is what you've been doing. This is what I want you to do. I want you to restore every single damaged car, and I never want you to go put the shopping cart and push it off to the side and leave without caring where it's going to end up. In fact, what I'm going to ask you to do is I want you to go a step further, and even if it's like 2 aisles down, I want you to put the shopping carts back. Yes, even with your kid in the car. Or if you have to go, in fact, why don't you go shopping and then end 5 minutes before you have to go pick up your kid instead of always rushing? Why don't you, manage your time a little better? Maybe these are bigger issues that we could work through. And the guy goes, okay, sure. But guess what? Doesn't stop. Continues to push those cars, continues to damage other cars. What would you do? Now, anybody that's reasonable, even listening to this very, very small yet perhaps even trite example will say, oh yeah, this person needs to be stopped. This person is a menace, right? So you bring it then what? You bring it to the church. This person has not listened. We're going to think about pushing it to the next level, but we're going to admonish everyone. So now everybody, when they see him at the parking lot, they're going to be like, hey bro, remember, put the shopping cart back. Hey bro, remember, put the shopping cart. And this person, instead of listening, is going to get annoyed. It's like, oh, you guys all need to stop being such Pharisees. Stop judging. You don't know me.
You don't know me.
And then it continues to do damage. In fact, so much damage now, you can actually count it. There's a significant monetary loss that people have undertaken because of this person's actions.
Yeah.
What do? So you might think even then at that point, it's not even excommunication.
Call the police.
This guy's got to go. Yeah, this guy's got to go to jail.
The police, yeah.
This guy's a public menace.
Yep.
And I think that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. But not every single act has, let's say, a public, secular law against it. For
Right.
instance, let's say you're watching pornography. It is a terrible thing to continue to watch pornography and not be repentant.
Mm-hmm.
You might not go to jail, though, but you should be punished in the church. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have two questions. Well, no, I lied. Sorry. I have more, but just in response to what you said. The first one being,
Put your shopping carts back.
so, okay, for the shopping cart
Be of
thing,
good character.
I think even in this room right now, 50% of us put the shopping carts away. I know for sure my friend does not. He just seems like that type.
I think Brian does.
You think so?
Yeah.
Interesting. Every time.
Every time.
So you're a shopping cart liar.
Maybe you're the shopping cart.
No, like I put it away.
I think 3 out of 4 people here put the shopping cart
But I
away.
put it away 95% of the time. 95%. Okay, for example, if there's a hurricane going on outside, it's raining so much, I want to just put it right there and go. But that's not like, that's an emergency though.
You're saying 5% of the time you go shopping at Target.
So our producer said, what Sam is saying is that when there's 5% of the time that he goes out to go shopping, there's a hurricane.
No, I'm just saying, or there might be something going on where I can't physically do it. That's a good one. But I
It's
think
not a hard, fast rule. I'm talking about this is the character issue. If
Yeah.
you continue to do this and continue to live like this,
Right.
and this is not something that you think about, you don't think about others, you don't think about how this affects others, you just care about yourself, that's a character flaw.
yeah.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. Like, all right, let's just get to what I address. You have to park within the lines.
No,
of
that
the
one's
parking
true.
lot.
No, that one's true. Yeah, they're there
If
for
you
a
don't
reason.
park within
Yeah.
the lines, you obstruct everyone else next to you from parking correctly and in a good, well-mannered, orderly way. In fact, it can be dangerous. And so you want to park within the lines. The lines are there to help and guide us, right? If there were no lines, then we would need to take extra care in how we park. Does that make sense? You know, when people park in the lawns and things like that. If you go apple picking, a lot of times you have to go park in like the grass somewhere, and they
Dirt
still direct
roads.
you, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, it's all character. All
Yeah.
I'm talking about this has to do with character. When you
Yeah.
don't care about anybody else, you just park whatever way you want. And so you want to do that. You want to maintain an order. You want to maintain something that is encouraging and edifying, beneficial to others. That is the Christian way. That's the Christian heart. That's what I'm saying. When you're missing that, you're missing the heart. So I'm not saying if you park orderly, you are a Christian.
No.
But I will say that for the most part, Christian will park in the lines. Now, of course, there are extreme examples. What if it's so dark you can't see the lines and you happen to park wrong? I'm not going to judge
Or
you.
you have to really use the restroom and you just have to rush.
Right. If you have to use the restroom, you have to rush. But let's say you do that all the time. All the time, you're like, I have to rush. I was like, that's a character issue.
That means
Dude, you may have a bladder problem. It might
You
be
didn't
actually
go before you left.
It might be a physiological problem that you have.
I shouldn't laugh because that could be a real thing. Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
you need a handicap,
That's true. Yeah.
little tag on your car.
I actually don't trust anybody that doesn't park within the lines because I just don't trust you.
So among our staffers, there are a few that don't park on the lines sometimes. But I will instruct them to repark their cars. And then one time this person said, "Are you serious?" And I said, "I'm very serious. I am so serious right now."
Wait, that wasn't
You
me.
can call me dead serious.
That wasn't me.
That wasn't you.
Okay. Because
This
I don't
is like
trust
years
people.
ago. I'm talking about years ago.
Yeah. Anybody that doesn't park within the lines, I don't trust them because it means you don't care about nothing.
I think I could say that about shopping carts. If someone says to me 5% of the time, I don't put the shopping carts
Okay.
back.
How about this? Do you always wipe the gym machine after you use the gym machine? See, actually, I think you do. I think you do wipe it. Yeah.
I wipe before and after. But that's beside the point.
Yeah.
That's beside the point. And if I don't wipe the machine, the person coming is gonna be stained with my sweat. That's something that I don't like.
But you don't sweat.
That's like a character thing. That's a character thing.
I guess so. I guess the question that I'm asking though is, I mean, you brought up a great example of parking. I think there's many lessons to learn from that. But someone might look at that example, and I know that you're not using it as like an exact example that we should be looking at. It's an analogy, but where is the sphere of influence for the church? Meaning, an example like parking seems like it's outside of the influence of church. It's done outside of church. It might not be done to church members. How come the church has so much control over people and what they do Monday through Saturday? Like,
no, this is so. I told you I took a small example.
Yeah.
This is not what I'm talking about. We are talking about outward, serious, and unrepentant sin. And so those are the key markers or the key factors that you have to look at. If it's outward, that means people are affected by it. That it's obvious. Not like I can't judge people on their thoughts. I don't know their thoughts.
Yeah.
And I should make a note. I don't put down church discipline on my own. I should make that note. Everybody here in our church knows it, but maybe not necessarily the listeners of the podcast. Levels of discipline go to the session. I don't unilaterally say this person is now under discipline. No church elder does that. We bring it to the session and we go, this needs to go under discipline. So we bring it to the session. Obviously, we don't always have to vote on things like that, but it's brought to the session. The session understands, and the session is the one that makes recommendations for or against going forward and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it needs to be outward, meaning there needs to be evidence.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be serious enough. So I'm not going to discipline someone that obviously isn't putting their shopping carts back. I told you that was a small example.
Right.
Because if it's serious, it can kind of get depressing.
Yeah.
And it needs to be unrepentant, meaning the person does not want to turn from their ways. So those are some of the key characteristics that we could see on why we can continue on with the course of discipline. That was only 2 things, right? We haven't even gone to the rest of the levels. But yeah, those are 2 things that we have the purpose and now we have the levels.
Yeah. And I want to read for us. And before I do, I want to also ask, this is the answer to the question. You brought up the session, how it's not you, but it's the session that is giving this church discipline. Where is the accountability for the elders to do this correctly? And I want to read for us 1 Timothy chapter 5 as well. It reads, "Do not admit a charge against an elder except on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. As for those who persist in sin, rebuke them in the presence of all so that the rest may stand in fear." And so this is talking about elder discipline, obviously, but where is the accountability for the elders to be doing the right thing, to be administrating church discipline in a biblical manner?
And so depending on what kind of church ecclesiology that you have and submit to, it may differ a little slightly. So if you've read 9 Marks and you're familiar with it, that accountability comes from the congregation because they are congregationalists. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
For a Presbyterian church, it goes up to the presbytery. So you can actually disagree with one of the session's decisions and you could appeal to a higher court. This is where we get the levels of court here in the States too. And so the United States is modeled after the Presbyterian church in a lot of ways. But here we start to appeal to a higher court. So let's say you're a local church, you don't like what the session handed down, you can actually appeal to the presbytery.
Yeah.
And then the presbytery will decide. The presbytery, if you don't like that from the presbytery, it's really tough from there. And depending on what Presbyterian model that you have, you might go to different, there might be even higher things. But
the synod.
The synod. Yeah. Or, you would say the regional, like some Reformed Presbyterian church, denominations have like regional synods, but a synod generally should mean like the General Assembly for, let's say, the PCA. And then the General Assembly, it's the final kind of most broad, biggest one. And they'll probably only take the biggest cases, kind of like the Supreme Court. they won't really take on like tiny local cases of, small claims or something like that. But if
Yeah.
it's big, they'll take it. Something that has to do with the law, meaning this law was written and now it's being abused. So they'll bring it up to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court judges things from, let's say, the First Amendment and the Second Amendment stuff a lot of times, right? And so even most recently, the Supreme Court handed down a ruling on Kathy Hochul, who's the governor of New York, who tried to ban or bar or limit conceal and carry.
Yep.
And the Supreme Court struck that down because it's going against the Second Amendment. So in the end, that's the spirit. Again, if you're Congregationalist, you're a little different. So if you're a Reformed Baptist, you're a little different here. But I would say ultimately in the end, the reason why we have these levels of authority is because we appeal to the greater law, which is the Word of God. Again, the United States models after the Presbyterian Church. And so the Presbyterian Church, the ultimate writ or script is the Word of God, is the Scriptures.
Yeah.
So you always appeal to the Scriptures. So if you're saying, I don't agree with how the session handled it. They could have been nicer. And they could have been nicer. They're not perfect in their execution, but are they right generally? Then if it is, then you really have nothing to appeal. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So some people just want to complain for complaint's sake. Be like, if it were me, I would have taken a little longer, or if it was me, I would take a little shorter. I would have made the decision more quickly. But yeah, that's not you. You're not the session. You're not an elder. And so a lot of times I think when people complain about accountability, it could mean that they just have problems with authority. And then I would start to think, how do they treat their mom and dad? For me, it always goes back down to, how do you treat your mom and dad? Because if you treat your mom and dad well, then you understand the importance of authority and you understand how to treat those that have authority over you, no matter who they are, no matter how ridiculous they may be. And you definitely wouldn't want to make a big deal about a small or a slight difference of opinion on how to execute a correct judgment. Does that also make sense? So let's say I go, you know what? We're going to go to like level 3 or level 4 of discipline. And I go to the congregation. This person is now come up to this level. But before we go on to the final level, I would like to give our church a year to pray about before we excommunicate this person.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some people might be like, that's too short. I don't like excommunication at all as an option. Or some people might be like, that's too long, way too long. A year to decide when this person is outright unrepentant sin? Some people might think that.
Yeah.
My whole thing is, you have a problem with some of these things. It's not really a problem. You just have a problem of within your heart. That's a heart issue. That's a character issue. So when people ask the accountability, I get it that I've taken it a little bit different because I think this is what people really need to hear. It's, do you understand that you are now submitting to an authority and that authority might not do exactly what you want, when you want, how you want it, but that authority will do it correctly. That's what you pray for. Please help them decide what is just, what is right, what will keep the purity of the church, and help me to abide by that. And so that's what we should be really praying for. Not whether, I think they should have done 11 months, not 12. 12 is
Right.
way too long.
Right.
And so for me, it's like, I think you missed the point, and I think you have a heart that is being corrupted by murmuring. That's a big issue, brother. You should get rid of that heart. And so you should address that issue. That's what I would think.
Yeah.
But depending on, to go back to your original question, depending on what polity that you have, it would depend on how the elders are kept accountable. Okay?
Yeah.
Because we're non-denominational, let's just
Right.
go back to our church. Because we're non-denominational, a lot of our accountability does come from a more congregationalist style, although we have been praying to go into a denomination soon. So if you've been following CGS for a long time, we thank you. We appreciate you. We appreciate your prayers. And we'll probably submit to one or two denominations.
One or two?
Like one or the other. One of two denominations.
One
I
of
was just saying.
two. Gotcha.
One of two denominations And if we stay non-denominational, we'll probably have to change some things in our bylaws so that we stay non-denom. But I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think that's going to be the path long term.
So, I mean, the reason why I also read 1 Timothy chapter 5 is an understanding that I think with our background, oftentimes people think that elders are untouchable. I think there is one aspect where, you either don't respect elders or you respect elders to the level of God almost to an extent. But I think it's important to understand that our elders are held accountable, like you said, according to the word. And that's what 1 Timothy chapter 5 is talking about. And I would even say that the accountability for elders is more difficult. Elders really can't mess up. They're held to a higher standard.
Well, when elders mess up, like you've read or were beginning to read, I forget if you read the whole thing, but they're just excommunicated. They're just done. They're just brought into the public admonition right away. There's no private for the elder.
Yeah.
Because you already have two witnesses that are pointing out this elder's sin.
Yeah.
So this person goes into direct public discipline. And that's what we see churches that are healthy do. Unfortunately, it's a very sad reality of life where elders would get disciplined. But this is what John MacArthur said last week when he came back in his Q&A and they were talking about Steve Lawson and they brought him up and he just said, in the end, and you could tell he was so heartbroken. He was genuinely heartbroken over what had happened. But at the same time, he said, this is how you know that God loves the church is because he keeps the purity of the church.
Yeah.
And one of the ways we continue on is we use discipline. I just wanted to read for you a psalm that I preached on some Saturdays ago. It's Psalm 77, verse 20. And I said this to the staff. I didn't say this in the sermon, but I said this to the staff in reflection. I thought I might share that. In Psalm 77, 20, if you have it, you could read it.
It reads, you led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron.
So if you go through the whole psalm, a lot of commentators, modern day commentators, will look at it and say, this is weird. Why is this here? Maybe we're missing a portion of the psalm because it's a weird place to end. But it's not true. People like Spurgeon and other like pastors, theologians, and other commentators have noted that this is actually not anticlimactic, but rather it is such a peaceful blessing that we have been given. So after all of this, and I won't explain the whole psalm, I just want to get to the point of this. God is our ultimate shepherd. God is our ultimate shepherd. We are his people. We are his flock. That's what it says, or it's implied in Psalm 77:20. But at the end, he goes, by the hand of Moses and Aaron. What does that mean? It means that God picks under shepherds to lead his people by his hand.
Yeah.
He picks Moses and Aaron. So by God's design and order and authority, him being shepherd over us means he also picks under shepherds like Moses and Aaron. How do you see elders then? You shouldn't see them as nothing, but you shouldn't see them as God.
Yep.
How should you see them? You should see them, Psalm 77:20. You should see them as a blessing from the ultimate shepherd. Leaders are a blessing. And you could tell because when a church does not have an elder, when a church does not have a senior pastor, that church suffers.
Yeah.
And it's very sad to see a church without an under shepherd. It really feels like it's a flock without a shepherd too. It feels like it's sheep without a shepherd because the ultimate shepherd gives us under shepherds to lead. So how should you see elders and pastors? You should see them as an incredible blessing that God gives because he is our ultimate shepherd. So pastors and elders should be seen as a blessing.
Yeah. And I think this is a reminder for us once again, and we've made this reminder a bunch of times, but to continue to pray for our elders and for our leaders.
And our elder elects.
And our elder elects, yeah.
Yeah, so they can be ready when the time comes to fill those shoes.
Yeah.
And wear those clothes. Wear the garb.
What
the
is that
shepherd's
called?
garb.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
not like a literal garb.
I mean, when you become ordained as a teaching elder in the PCA, that would be, or if you were ordained as a minister in the OPC, so they have different names depending
Yeah.
on what Presbyterian denomination.
Yeah.
When you become specifically like that ordained, then you will be donned a robe.
They robe you.
Yeah, there's a robing process.
Yeah.
And so that's why
pretty cool.
ordained ministers have a robe and they wear a robe. Although for me, I don't normally wear the robe unless it's a special occasion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some Presbyterian ministers choose, and I think it's I respect that. They choose to wear the robe every Sunday
Yeah.
when they go up on the pulpit.
Yeah. And that's to put the focus not on what the preacher looks like or dresses like or anything else, but it's to shift the focus and prioritize the focus on the Word of God, right? Is that what the purpose of the
Yeah,
robe
it's
is?
a uniform to
Yeah.
symbolize what you are a part of, what you represent. And that's why it's a significant act of robing
Yep.
when you are a minister. I get it that, in the Congregationalist model, that all elders are like equal. Not true. Not true. Even Reformed Baptists will understand that elders and pastors have a distinct separation, even among the elders. Even though all the elders are equal, there is a distinction between the one that has been set apart to preach and teach regularly.
Yeah.
And so, even Nine Marks believes this, okay? John MacArthur, non-denominational, but Baptist in their ecclesiologies, they believe that.
Yeah.
Okay? And so, everybody that understands the Bible knows that there is still a separation between leaders and Joshua, between the elders and Moses, that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so when you and Brian become ordained, that robing process will happen, and that will be a wonderful thing that you can look forward to, and also a very, very fearful thing you could also keep in mind.
Yeah. So far we have discussed the importance and the biblical basis of church discipline, why it is a mark of the church. It's for the purity of the church, and how if you really believe in the word and the Bible is preached correctly, you would have church discipline because it's an obedience to Christ's word that we do this. We also talked about how we are to do it regarding, looked at Matthew chapter 18. And, you have a brother go first and you have two or three and then the church and then it's excommunication after that. So we've gone over like the levels of discipline. We've gone over what sins would be disciplined. Like you said, it's one that affects others, public, and one that's unrepentant. I'm curious. So I think a lot of times people don't know whether church discipline is going on or not. We've talked about why church discipline is a good thing and why it's a necessary thing. Is it wrong for a church not to commit itself to disciplining its members? Does that make it a fake church? Does that make it is it so serious that it makes it not a church?
Let's say we don't want the third mark, we only want the first two.
Right.
This is what Calvin also realized in his institutes. You can't have a church without discipline because the third mark preserves the first two.
Yeah.
You can't have biblical preaching if no one's following it. There can't be biblical preaching that is true if there's no obedience that follows it. So what ensures obedience to the biblical preaching? It's discipline. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I preached on certain things on the former Sunday, a few Sundays ago, and there was a very explicit, application that you could put in. People saw, and people weren't really adhering to it. And so one of our elders, he came up to me and said, "You should just preach that same sermon again." And, that was funny at the time, but my thing is I only preach it once because discipline has to come up after. I don't keep on telling you something. I'll tell you what the Bible says and how we ought to apply it. And then if you don't follow it, you don't preach the same sermon again. You put discipline. Secondly, when the sacraments are administered, if you don't have discipline, who do you administer the sacraments to? You have to make sure that member is in good standing. If the member is not in good standing, if they are in outright unrepentant sin, it's serious and it's bad, you can't give them communion. And so some of the elders will come up to me, he's like, in all honesty, I don't think I could give this person communion. They bring it to the session first, and the session discusses, should we offer this person communion then?
Yeah.
Because this seems like it's a very outward, serious, unrepentant sin that we are now in the process of discipline. And so, church discipline. And so when we go, no, we actually go to the person and we go, and this has happened multiple times, don't take communion, because if you come up, we won't give it to you. And that person just sits down. And other people come up and be like, oh, I didn't notice this person. And they have to deal with it. They have to deal with that. So some people take communion even though they are in sin just because of what other people might think. Dude, that's wrong. Your main priority should be, is my heart right with God? Again, going back to our previous podcast, look up 1 Corinthians 11. That's why some of you have fallen ill. Some of you have even died. It's that serious.
Yeah.
And so how do we protect people? What is to the benefit of the church? Discipline is a benefit then. It saves you in the sense where you are preserved from even greater wrath and judgment. So that discipline should help you. And that's the heart of someone that does this. Yes, the elders are thinking twofold, meaning we think about the person, we want to save them from a greater wrath or judgment, condemnation, yes, but also it's upon us to uphold that purity. So we do that knowing that we will be judged. Don't presume to be teachers, my brothers. Otherwise, you'll be, don't you know that they'll be judged more strictly or harshly?
Yeah.
And so we take that into mind. So for the elder, you think of it in those two dimensions. And so at least, and so you want to make sure that discipline is present. It's always there. So is there someone under discipline? I can honestly say, even from CGS's standpoint, there's always someone under discipline. Always under. Someone's always under levels 2 to 4. Always. And mind you, we haven't talked to like level 4 yet. Talked about excommunication as much. We've just touched upon it. But if I may take this time.
Yeah.
Excommunication is not the final. Excommunication, we believe, is still temporary in the sense that when we excommunicate someone, we excommunicate hoping that this will bring them back.
Yep.
So we hope that this is a temporary measure that we have given so that the person will turn back. It spurs on repentance so that you understand that ultimately excommunication is a compassionate reproach. It's a compassionate way of dealing with people that are still being given unto sin. And so you urge the church to continue to pray for those that are excommunicated. We should remember those that are excommunicated in our church, and we should still pray for them, pray that they repent, turn back, so that they won't stay under the wrath of God. Paul writes it in a way where he says, I'm going to hand them over to Satan. Because when you're outside the protection of the church, guess where you are? You are under the hand of Satan. And so those are things that you would see that the church has the authority to do. Church has been given that authority. If you read the rest of Matthew 18, it would be what the church loosens, what the church binds is also in heaven.
Yeah.
What does that mean? It has everything to do with discipline.
And I think a good reminder that you give the church actually every time that there is an excommunication in our church, which there has been, is the reminder that how we are to interact with this individual after they're excommunicated. And I think it's a good reminder for us that now that they are excommunicated, the church no longer affirms their faith. And so therefore, we have to continue to pray and evangelize and share the gospel with this person. I think that's really important. I think oftentimes people don't know what to do after people are excommunicated. Like, can I eat with them? Can I hang out with them? Can they come into the building of our church? Like, can they do this stuff? But I think as we are now treating this individual as a non-believer, we have to then in love continue to pray and share the gospel with them. And I think that's really, really important for us to do.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of things that discipline does. It teaches us purity, it teaches us authority, it teaches us the role of the elders. It teaches us how to be compassionate. It teaches us how sacraments can be kept pure, how we can continue to listen to the Word of God and be sanctified. It does all of that.
Yeah.
So let me bring us back to purity.
Yeah.
It's about the purity of the church. This is what Christ has demanded and has ensured at the same time, which is the beautiful thing about Calvinism and the preservation of the saints. But if you even go to Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25 and on, it talks about how Jesus is going to be the one that cleanses and, make sure that the bride will be spotless and without blemish, right?
Yeah.
And so it's Christ that does it. And in the means by which he does it, the primary means by which he does it is church discipline. So I hope that people remember that discipline is ultimately a blessing.
Many times there are those who have been negatively impacted by improper methods of church discipline, whether it's the lack of church discipline or whether it's an abuse of church discipline. How would you speak to or counsel somebody that is going through pain as a church that they attended prior, inaccurately or incorrectly had church discipline?
Yeah, I think for the most part, it's the absence of church discipline that has negatively affected a lot of people. Abuse is not a proper exercise of discipline.
Yeah.
So abuse is, I would still put that at the lack thereof of proper discipline. And so abuse can be something where just a senior pastor comes up and just starts to, hammer down things.
Yeah.
That's abuse. And so those are things that people might have witnessed. So I think for the most part, people have witnessed the lack thereof of proper discipline.
Yeah.
I don't think many people have experienced even a severe hand of discipline because I just don't think they got the right discipline. So I encourage people, if you've been hurt, then make sure you get ministered to, that salve or that balm is administered to your heart by the 3 true marks of the church. You need to have good preaching over your soul to make sure that you're taking the sacraments rightly and, you are right before God. And thirdly, make sure that there is still discipline in your life, the proper discipline. So going to a right church with these 3 marks is very important.
Yeah.
Again, the primary reason why you go to a church cannot be because of something outside these marks.
Yep.
Whether they have a children's ministry that you like, or they have this program for my kids, so I like that. That cannot be the reason why you go. The primary reason why you go to a church is that it's a true church, that they have these marks. And these other things will come. If they don't come, so be it.
Yeah.
At least you have a good church. At least you have the true church. You'll be in heaven. If you have to suffer a little, so be it. Praise the Lord that God will take that suffering and, he will reward you with that.
Yeah.
Stop complaining. Stop murmuring, because that heart will lead to bitterness. And that heart, if you were in a true church, will put you under discipline.
Thank you for that. And I think the importance of these 3 marks cannot be stressed enough. And I hope and I pray that these 3 points were helpful and encouraging to those who listened. And if there's any question or if there's anything that you wanted us to discuss, we would love to hear your thoughts. Please send them to podcast@cgsnj.org. I do have a quick Q&A, and it has to do with what you just talked about. And that question is, we've talked about what a good church is. We talked about the true marks, the 3 marks of a healthy and good church, true church. Is there ever a reason to leave what you believe is a good church outside of moving? Is there ever a reason to leave a true church? Because what you have just said, to be quite honest with you, there are not a lot of churches that can maybe fit in this bill of a true church, sadly. And so, I've heard reasons, the preaching isn't really hitting me, or the praise team isn't that good. The children's ministry isn't that good. The people are kind of mean and not welcoming. I think the people are a little judgmental, not as gracious as I think they should be. And there's all these different reasons. You guys don't have a playground. You guys don't have a basketball court. And I'm bringing up silly examples for a reason. And these are the reasons that people give when they leave the church. Some people say, I don't know. I just don't really feel it here. And they just leave. Is there ever a good reason to leave a true church?
If you have covenant with the church, then you shouldn't leave, especially if it is a true church. But we live in reality. Reality is that not everyone's mature. Not everyone even that believes that they're mature knows about the 3 marks or understands it, right? And so maybe you think you're a mature Christian, but you believe that the children's program is primary for you.
Yeah.
Because you really want to make sure your kids grow up well.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like offended if someone challenges you. How dare you talk to me about how I can raise my kid? I don't know, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Right. And so reality is not everyone's mature. Not everyone's healthy. And sometimes they will, exercise or express things in an unhealthy manner. That's the reality. So let's say someone came to me and said, I think this is a true church, but I just can't take it anymore. Why? Because I don't like Sam. Sam and I couldn't get
not known
get
for
it.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm
Well,
very
you
liked
kind of know
around
for
here.
that.
I'm very liked, I think, out of everybody that I know.
I think
like
you're
me the
a
most.
polarizing figure, kind of like our presidential nominees. Some people love you, some people hate you. But if that's the case, I always encourage the brother or sister. You need to make amends with Sam. You need to make sure that you don't hold anything against them. And if the brother has wronged you, you bring that sin to your brother.
Yeah.
Don't just
Yeah.
leave the church. And
Right.
for the most part, what I have found is that even when I've said that, that wasn't the reason why they were leaving.
No.
Yeah, they'll just say that as an outward reason.
Right.
It's because of this. It's because of this elder. Or it's because of what this person did to me. I have found that has not really been the reasons. They convince themselves that it is.
Yep.
And so if you've convinced yourself, it's hard to for someone else to convince you otherwise.
Yeah.
But the reason why I say that they've convinced themselves is precisely because if they really are a brother in Christ, you need to make amends. Make amends. And now that you've made amends, why would you leave?
Mm-hmm.
What you said was the source of the problem has been resolved, right? And so why do people leave? People leave because they are unsatisfied. They believe in this church that their murmuring will grow. They don't know how to deal with it. And so instead of dealing with it, they'll just leave, and they think that by going to a new church, they can have a fresh slate. This new church has a great children's program, so my kid will be healthy then. The sad reality is, I hope that they do. I really do. But it's hard for me to say, even statistically, that that's possible. Everybody wants to believe that they're the exception. But let me tell you, if you've covenanted with someone and you break that covenant and you leave without a good reason, I don't think that you'll have a good future, because you have to deal with what is in the past. You can't have a good future if what is in the past is still unresolved or corrupted even. It's like if someone shot you in the stomach and you'd be like, you know what? I don't want to get shot in the stomach again. So I'm going to put on this bulletproof vest. It'd be like, it's great. It's great. I'm sure it'll protect you.
Yeah.
But you got to deal with that bullet in your stomach. Otherwise, everything else, gangrene, infection, you'll die. Yeah,
Gangrene comes from that? I thought that was like a pirate ship thing.
Is it a pirate? It's scurvy.
That's scurvy.
Yeah. It's like rust and metals and
Gangrene.
anyway. Forget I said gangrene then. It's obviously staying with you. But yeah, those things are going to affect you for the rest of your life.
It almost seems like, though, the way that you're explaining church membership and covenanting, and it kind of makes it seem like I'm a little claustrophobic right now. Like you're trapping me. You're trapping me in this relationship. I really don't feel this church. I need to get out of here.
It's the same thing with getting married and things like that. When you get married, you're like, I think the immature person will think, and look, most people are immature, if not all, when they first get married. Who's mature when they get married? Most people are. So you'll have these thoughts. And so when you're a beginner Christian, you'll have these thoughts because you're immature. It's the reality of life. But we try not to let you live out in that immaturity. But as an adult, you do what you want.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not gonna handcuff you or anything. But if you feel trapped, same thing with getting married. If you make any kind of covenant, you'll feel trapped. But you made the covenant. You didn't make it solely with the partner. When you make a covenant, you make it with God. So if you made a covenant with a true church, you made the covenant. You deal with it. That's sink or swim. You know, that is ride or die. That is, I'm going to do this till death do us part. That's the kind of heart that you would have. Now, because of where we are in society today, even saying this sounds a little cultish. That what people will say. This sounds like a cult.
Yeah, I think so.
Because a cult will say you can't go anywhere.
Right, you can't leave.
Yeah, one of the policies that I have personally is I just have a huge, exit. So our back door is very, very open, and you can leave, and I won't give you that much of a hard time. When you come in, I'll give you a hard time. So you'll have to do these membership classes, and we'll interview you. We'll test you on your knowledge of the gospel. And, when you covenant with us. Now, people think that we should have a more stricter outdoor policy too. And I get that. I understand that. The reason why I don't is because I don't see the benefit of holding someone after I've given them all the information that I've given them against their will. I think their bitterness will grow. I don't think their respect for the elders will grow at all, especially because now they have blamed a bunch of people. And I've said, you got to deal with that. And they don't want to deal with it. I don't think that's going to help them. I could hold them, but I don't think that's really going to benefit them. So what I could do is the next best thing. I could pray and hope that they enter into a healthy community. And a lot of times what they will realize is when they do enter a healthy community, they'll ask, where are you from? They're like, oh, I'm from CGS. They'll be like, why'd you leave then? They'll ask him that. I was like, I didn't really get along with people. And they'll immediately know this person is not going to get along here. And so if you are a healthy, so something that I tell people is that I'm friends with everyone in this area.
Yeah.
Especially if you're Reformed. Friends with every church pastor. So we know each other. And so let's say someone from another church came to our church and they're Reformed. I would say, why'd you come here? I'd be like, oh, I didn't really like this and that. And now I think in my head, this person's not healthy. That's the first thought that I put in. So I just want you to know what a pastor thinks, okay?
Yeah.
When someone's church hopping and they just got hurt by a church member or something like that and they didn't like it, oh, they didn't have this program for me, I just didn't get along with people, I'm going to think, this person's not going to get along here. That's just the way it is. Because what makes us so much more special than another Reformed church? I don't think so. I don't think we're that much special. If you're a true church, we should just praise God that there's a true church out there, right?
Yeah.
And so those are things that I think about. And so we have tested people. If they're trying to come over from another church, why'd you leave? What's going on? And for the most part, I think people understand that. So when they come from another church and they're like, oh, this pastor did this to me, it wasn't very nice, blah, blah, blah. Even if I think it's genuine, it's multiple years before they serve. Many, many years before they serve. The testing needs to be there. And maybe that church is, dying. Maybe it is kind of dissolving. And so I also take that into account. So to be honest, we haven't had that much horizontal transition in CGS. Maybe someone who's moving here who understands, that's most of where we get our people from. Or sometimes we lose people in marriage or gain people in marriage. So that's another one. But the hurt one we always have to deal with. So if you've been hurt by another church and you come to any church, let alone CGS, you'd have to deal with it. So if you leave our church and you're still hurt, a healthy church will ask you, why don't you resolve that while you were there?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a question that a lot of people have asked. Is, at what point do you leave a church? And I think that was a helpful answer for us to consider and think about.
Oh, yeah. There are reasons to leave. Don't get me wrong. One of the primary ones is it does not have the true marks of the church. It doesn't have these three things.
Right.
If the sermon is boring or you just can't hear it, I need to hear more. What do you mean the sermon is boring? I won't immediately go to one or the other answers. Like, oh, it's good. Glad you like our sermons. Or like, how dare you?
Yeah.
I won't go to either one. I'll need to hear more. So for a lot of things, I'll just need to hear more. Does that make sense?
But so the question is, well, this might be a true church, might be a good church, but we can't say everyone is equally gifted in preaching, right? So let's just say one church, Church A is reformed and is good, has excellent preaching. The preacher is very, very good. Church B, also reformed, true church, preacher is not as good.
This is a hypothetical understanding that one person did not already commit to the church. They didn't commit to any church. If you committed to a church, you've committed
they
to
committed
the church.
to the church.
And then they just stay in the church.
Gotcha.
Right. If your favorite preacher, I think it was Matt Chandler or something, came next door and they're like, oh, Matt Chandler's not going to move. You don't move. You've already committed to the church, right?
Yeah.
Right? Even if Matt Chandler comes. Was that too much?
There's just a lot there that I don't think we have the time to unpack.
Yeah. Maybe that was too much.
No, I think that's helpful. Because I think, that's one of the reasons why people move is, the sermon doesn't hit me. And I think that's just something that we have to consider. Like you said.
Because, those are things that I consider because what are they really saying? Is it entertaining? Right. Is it keeping them awake?
Right.
What do you mean by it doesn't hit you? Are you saying it doesn't use some of the, things that you think a sermon should be? Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't have 3 points like you think?
Yeah.
I don't know. Not every Reformed sermon has 3 points.
Yeah.
They can, they might. Not everyone, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think John MacArthur uses 3 points ever. Sometimes he uses 7 points. Sometimes he uses 0 points, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that's the point. It's my point, right? And some people always use 3 points. I'm not sure who always uses 3 points. Who's the big boy that uses 3 points all the time?
To be honest, I actually don't know a lot of big boys that use 3 points. It's more of like, not like that.
Yeah. And so you can use 3 points for teaching purposes, though.
Yeah.
So that's why if you've been coming to CGS, I've been using 3 points to help guide the discussion time and the questions.
Harry Reeder used to always use alliteration, and it was 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think it helps if you more didactically, if you want to go down the points. And,
it's a teaching style, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And so obviously, my style. My style, I'm much more comfortable not doing the points, but I will at certain times for a teaching mechanism.
Yeah.
But yeah, some people use 3 points well. Some people went to good seminaries like Westminster, and they'll think that all good sermons need to be 3 points. Unfortunately, I don't know why they think that. You can tell me why some people think that from Westminster.
It's Tim Keller.
But yeah, I don't know why they do. I don't think it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
I think you need to communicate well, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so. I don't know if this is really pertinent, but
it's interesting that you're talking about this because I think now when I think about preaching or when I go to, when I'm at the drawing board, as I read through a text, I always try to think in 3 points. I don't know why I do that. I don't know why I do that.
I think it's a great way for every beginner preacher to start.
Yeah.
So when you're starting off preaching, I think if I had to pick one or the other, I would always say you need to preach 3 points. That's how I would. That's how I would go. I would definitely do that. I think the 3 points is a very powerful mechanism that preachers, especially beginner preachers or young preachers, can use to get better at preaching and communicating.
Yeah.
I think there are some universal rules out there that the 3 points helps, but now this is a side note. I don't know if this really is pertinent to our podcast.
It's interesting. It's pertinent to me.
But I'll say this. I believe that every sermon is a piece. It's like a musical piece.
Yeah.
You need to have a beginning. You need to have a body. You need to have a conclusion. You need to have an overture. You need to have the allegro. You need to have all these other pieces in there.
Fortissimo.
No, that's the...
Isn't that Allegro?
No.
Isn't that a coffee brand?
Yeah.
Staccato.
But it's where you put a piece together. It needs to have all these elements.
Yeah.
Okay. And so if you don't have, let's say, an overture in your sermon, why not? That's what I would ask. Okay. So even if there's 3 points, you always have an intro.
Yeah.
That's the overture. That means if someone listens to the overture, they'll hear hints of the rest of the piece throughout the, throughout their listening. And the same thing with the intro. When you hear the intro, you should be like, oh, I see everything as you listen to the rest of it.
Yeah.
That's a good intro. I don't know why we went here. Maybe it's just for Sam.
No, it's just interesting.
But yeah, so there are different ways to preach. Some people might think it's boring, but one of the reasons why I mentioned that before is because some person has said to me, why don't you preach in 3 points? And then I said, what? This person went to seminary and this person believed in their heart that a sermon or a correct sermon has to have 3 points. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I wanted to address that. So let's say you go to you're a seminarian that just graduated or is going to seminary and you're like, oh, Pastor Eugene doesn't preach in 3 points. He's not that good of a preacher. Just based on that criteria alone, I would say that's not necessarily true. But for a young preacher, someone who's in their 30s or even 20s, starting out, I would say always preach in 3 points.
Yeah.
It helps you organize, it helps you order, and it gives you the flow. You start thinking that way. As you get older, you may still keep it, may not keep it, but that depends on you, right? Someone like John MacArthur that doesn't use 3 points, I don't think anybody would hold it against them.
No.
R.C. Sproul does not use 3 points. I wouldn't hold it against them at all. And, R.C. Sproul is also a Reformed Presbyterian preacher, right?
I think he said Sproul just now.
Sproul.
Yeah.
Like soul.
Sproul like soul. Not Sproul like
Ghoul.
drool. Yep. Ghoul.
Or sproul like growl. Well, that's what he says.
Wait, so that means that many people messed up his last name to the point that he had to make a little nursery rhyme for it.
He goes, it's not sproul like, otherwise you'll make me growl or something.
Oh.
It's sproul like soul.
He was a very winsome person,
Good guy.
Yeah, I never knew him, but I guess I will one day. Thank you for that, Pastor Eugene. And I hope that this was helpful. And again, please send us your questions. I'm not going to beg you to send them, but I am going to ask you repeatedly in passionate form.
I like that. Implore.
I implore you, yes. We're going to move on to current events. On October 23rd, 2024, that was last Wednesday, Donald Trump tweeted this on Truth Social. Kamala Harris did nothing as 120,000 Armenian Christians were horrifically persecuted and forcibly displaced in Artsakh. Christians around the world will not be safe if Kamala Harris is president of the United States. When I am president, I'll protect persecuted Christians. I will work to stop the violence and ethnic cleansing, and we will restore peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So,
Azerbaijan.
yeah. Azerbaijan. Just in case that people don't know what we're talking about here, Armenia and Azerbaijan are countries that are next to the Caspian Sea.
Azerbaijan.
What did I say?
You said Azerbaijan, but it's Azerbaijan.
I don't hear the difference. So these are two countries that are next to the Caspian Sea, next to Turkey, Syria, Iran. It's in that region of the world. So this conflict between Azerbaijan and the Republic of Artsakh, also known as the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic, has been going on. But this and Artsakh is a region within Azerbaijan that's ethnically Armenian. But this year, on January 1st of 2024, Nagorno-Karabakh was formally dissolved as a republic. And so there has been a lot of, there's been persecution going on. And I guess, this isn't jumping out in our news cycle. And I kind of wonder why. At the same time, what's going on here and why is this something that we should be paying attention to the point that Donald Trump tweeted this?
Yeah, I think Donald Trump is trying to appeal to Christians ever since the millions, 1 million Christians aren't going to vote this cycle. They don't like Trump.
Yep.
And they don't like Kamala. So those are things that I think is political. But I will say that I think this is a good thing, however, that he brought it up. There are Christians all over the world that are being persecuted, and we know for a fact that this current administration is doing little to nothing, if not the other way, of promoting harm to the Christians all over the world. When Biden pulled out of Afghanistan,
Yep.
hundreds of thousands of Christians died. They were persecuted. They were beheaded. They were killed out in the streets like dogs and animals.
Yeah.
And so this is happening in the world. The Armenian, well, first of all, you have to understand that Armenian Christians have their roots back to the 1st century. Before any other Christian nation, even before the Edict of Milan, or, Constantine had that edict, right? That this was a Christian nation. Armenian Christians existed. They were there. They were already Christian there. And so they have this history. And now they are being persecuted. They are being displaced. They are being killed. And, people look to the U.S. for help.
Yeah.
Especially a long-standing peoples like the Armenian Christians. They don't get it. And so that's why this is going beyond politics, I hope, or the political, narrative that we see here. But Armenian diaspora, they do not like the Biden-Harris administration. They actually hate them because of that. And they are either withholding their vote and saying they're not going to vote for Harris because of this, or they're going to vote the other way.
Yeah.
Trump obviously picked up on this because, there is no real reason to doubt that Trump will not do what he says. So some people have said to me, he's like, well, how do you know he's not just patronizing Christians and he's
Right.
not, he's just saying this?
Wants to vote.
Yeah, he just wants to vote. I think he does. I think it's true. He just wants to vote, but he does want to vote, I should say. But, I think the other question that the reason why other people believe him is because whenever he says something, he did it. So when he said, I'm going to do this for the Christians, he actually did it. And one of the things that he did do in 2016 was when he was about to lose the Christian vote, he said, you know what? Here are the judges that I'm going to pick for the Supreme Court. And he sent it out to the Christian coalitions, and they were all Christian.
Alito?
No.
Was he before?
Yeah.
I like that guy.
Samuel.
Yeah, that's why.
That's why you like him.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
yeah. And those are things that we can see being played out in the political field arena. But what's really happening out in the world is a big deal. So he's saying, he's actually vying for the Armenian vote here, the diaspora here, and saying, there's ethnic cleansing that is going on, but I will support you guys, meaning I'll help defend you. And so it does leave some Armenian people that are here in the States optimistic. Some will say cautiously optimistic. And I think it's good to know. It's good to know because when, people are being persecuted in China, Trump actually did go to Xi Jinping and say something about that. He's like, yo, you got to stop this, bro.
Yeah.
And, he's like, I don't like this. He would say it directly to Xi's face. I don't like this. And that affects the world's nations' leaders. And so him being able to do that was something that people really appreciated and really liked. We know for a fact that for the last 3.5, now almost 4, that the current administration has not done that. In fact, they've done the opposite. And so people don't like that. And so people will keep that in mind when casting their vote or trying to educate themselves on, foreign policy.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Pastor Eugene. I think, again, I think this is they're not to be confused with Armenians. I think the pronunciation might be a little difficult. There's Armenians and then Armenians. There's Armenians and Armenians. So we're talking about Armenian Christians from Armenia, not Armenian Christians who follow Jacobus Arminius, which is a heresy. So we're talking about Armenian Christians.
If we're going to go a little bit more political, again, you could say he's trying to vie for the Armenian vote here, but
Yeah.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think he is. That doesn't make any sense. They're all in California. They all live in like Glendale or something. Like 1.5 million people of them are just there, and then California is not going to flip over red because of
the Armenian
Armenian population vote there. And so I don't think so. I think he's making a broader appeal to Christians, saying this person, my opponent, will not protect Christians, but I will to whatever degree. So that's what I think.
Thank you for that, Pastor Gina. And maybe next week for a current event, we'll review once again why we should vote. Because next week, it's Tuesday. Next Tuesday is Election Day. And so it'll be a good reminder for us. And thank you for that, Pastor Eugene. And we thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. We'll be discussing church leadership next week, beginning with the deacon. That's exciting, especially because
The following week. Because we're doing elections next week, you said.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. Deacons the following week. Next week, we'll be talking about the election. We hope and pray that this has been a blessing in your ears. Fight the good fight, finish the race, keep the faith.
Peace.